There are around 28 million human trafficking victims worldwide, in every country, in every city. But many people aren't talking about it. Who will speak up to set these captives free? Join us on the Freedom Project, where we talk about ways to fight back against trafficking in our local communities. We are the next generation. We are the change.
Good morning and welcome back to the Freedom Project podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Glendenning, and today we are going to be delving into episode 3 of the Freedom Project podcast, and we are going to be looking at how to get a girl. How does the psychological process of sex trafficking affect women and young children, and how do traffickers, going inside the minds of traffickers, how do they actually go from the stage of looking for victims and assessing where their vulnerabilities are to actually engaging them in the sex trade themselves? So that's what we'll be diving into it today. So the first thing I wanted to look at was the stages of the grooming process to traffic a victim. There are multiple ways that organizations can assess and look at different phases of trafficking, of how they get into that. But the main thing is that there will always be some kind of assessment stage where traffickers are actively looking to see if victims meet vulnerabilities in their environmental or familial, whatever it is. There's that, and then there's going to be the next stage of when they start to actually groom the victim. They start to talk to them, love on them, ask them questions about their lives and things like that. And then suddenly it moves into the next phase, which is where the trafficking begins. And so we break that up into 6 steps in today's episode, but usually in all anti-trafficking models, those are the main general 3 that we see. So stage 1 is what we call prowling for vulnerabilities. And so this is where traffickers are starting to look, and they're going out. This could be malls, this could be libraries, schools, events, anything like that. It can also be online, because there are lots of traffickers who are now utilizing social media as a platform to pick up children and women and men. And so traffickers, the thing you have to understand is traffickers are looking to fill voids. These can be financial or emotional needs. I know we talked about social media as a valuable tool to access victims, but traffickers, I know we talked in a previous episode, if you have watched it, it's episode 2, I believe. Traffickers typically don't use brute force. They're not dragging you into a car and transporting you hundreds of miles. Does that happen? Yeah, absolutely. But is that the most common? No. And we're looking at domestic sex trafficking. And so what happens a lot is that you will have a trafficker who tries to make the victim fall in love with them, or tries to make a victim have some kind of relational, emotional connection to them, because it's easier to manipulate somebody if they trust you and if they love you. And so the common victims to be aware of, and everybody and anybody can be a victim of sex trafficking, but the most common and targeted are those with a previous history of abuse, both sexually and physically. So I know traffickers look for women and children who have already been sexually abused, because especially if you have been a child when it happened to you, because if you grew up in an environment like that, which we also see in familial trafficking, if you grew up in an environment where you were heavily sexualized and exposed to explicit circumstances at a young age, it's easier for you to be put in that situation again because of trauma and all the things like that. So traffickers utilize that, and also foster children. And my heart goes out, because we see that in the Tri-Cities, where it's such a big issue of foster children are at risk because they slip through the cracks. Nobody seems to really be paying attention to it, but they are they're a big risk factor in sex trafficking. And also any of the LGBTQ youth or runaways, and also any victims who struggle with self-worth, mental health issues, or codependency, because traffickers will utilize all of those in order to gain access to a victim and be able to just really capitalize and manipulate what they can about that situation to use it for their advantage. And so if a woman struggles, or let's say a young teen girl, she struggles with codependency and boundary issues, the trafficker is going to use that. In the learning stage, he's going to get to know her interests, her likes, his dislikes. He's going to realize that she's codependent, and then he'll use that. And so I also wanted to point out that anytime a social media app has a messaging section, and almost all apps have them, which is really crazy. Even like Pinterest has a social media section to message. And so individuals are at risk for trafficking. And so I know when predators are grooming children, sextortion, which I know we also talked about in our previous video, is a really big thing. And people can be trafficked from their homes without ever having to actually meet their trafficker or moving cities. They could be trafficked within their own home due to sextortion, right? And so typically, if you have no idea what sextortion is, you're like, Kylie, what are you talking about? So sextortion is, I'll give you an example to kind of break it down. So let's say that there's a girl named Stacy. Let's say she's 13. She likes horses, she likes surfing, and she is not having the greatest time in her friend group. And so she goes, let's say on Pinterest, let's use Pinterest. She goes on Pinterest, she's looking at certain boards, and somebody messages her on this messaging app. And they get to become friends, and this really cute boy, and she looks at all his pins, and he likes horses, and he likes surfing too, you know, because hers is a public account, so he can see what she posts as well, or what she likes and saves. And so he starts messaging her, and he's just showering her with beautiful compliments, like, you're so pretty, you're so wonderful, you know, you're so smart. And after a while, after they've gained common ground and the trafficker has found trust, and Stacy believes that she's talking to a 14-year-old boy who's a couple states away, he asked her to send a nude picture of herself. And maybe Stacy's uncomfortable, but she has just found this boy who's really interested in her and who likes all the same things, and he's really, really cute. And so she knows that she shouldn't, but she doesn't want to lose this friendship, so she goes ahead and she sends the picture, right? Well, then turns out that this boy, let's call him Trent, who she thought was this guy who liked horses too and also liked surfing. Turns out he's not actually Trent. His name is Michael, and he lives in, I don't know, let's say Oklahoma. And he says, okay, well, I have a nude picture of you, Stacy, and if you don't send me a video of you doing pornographic material, I'm going to send this to your school, I'm going to send this to your pastor, I'm going to send this to your parents, and I'm going to post this online because your face is in it, and I'm going to make sure everybody knows what a slut and what a whore you are. And so Stacy is now in this major dilemma. She is frightened. She does not know what to do. She's scared. And what she ends up doing is she can't tell her parents. She just feels like she can't tell them. They wouldn't understand. They get her in big trouble. So she goes ahead and she makes this pornographic material, and she sends it to, to Michael. Well, then obviously predators are predators. They're not going to stop when they get what they want. They're just going to continue to exploit and manipulate a victim. So Michael says, okay, now I have a video of you doing pornographic material and your face is in this. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, and you don't do A, B, C, D, you know, and the list goes on. And now Stacy is quite literally making child pornography in her room and giving it to Michael, who is then selling it, trading it, etc. online. And she has just been sextorted, right? She has been used for child pornographic material, and she's been blackmailed. There's been a force and fraud there, right? And so that is a way that predators can manipulate children online without ever actually having to go to their homes. Because they don't actually meet them in real life, you know? But that's what sextortion is, and it's a serious issue. There's been so many countless articles, and because it's not just a little girl Stacy issue too, right? It could be what's a guy named? It could be Alex, who's on the basketball team, who meets this really hot chick online, and it's phishing. That's what it is. It's like catfishing. And there have been serious news articles talking about teens committing suicide over it because they get so distressed and they don't know what to do and they don't want it to come out. And then piled on top of high school pressures and scholarships. And what if my, this coach who wants to recruit me for basketball, what if he sees this? What if they see it? What if they deny me getting into my dream school if I lose my scholarship? And they end up committing suicide over it. So it is a huge deal and needs to be taken with the uttermost seriousness. But this is just one way that social media can be used as a tool in stage 1 of prowling for vulnerabilities. The next stage of trafficking is stage 2, creating trust. And so while some may think, and I know we kind of addressed this, some may think that force is the most common way to traffic a victim, and it absolutely does happen. I know that last week we were talking about some of the terminology of sex trafficking, and we talked about gorilla pimps who primarily use and manipulate their victims by using force and the threat of abuse and actual abuse, kicking, punching, whatever it is. Seduction is typically easier to actually manipulate a victim and psychologically manipulating them further so they feel like it's actually their choice to be there in this, you can't really call it a relationship, but in this toxic environment. And so pretending to care, predators find ways to manipulate victims. And so in stage 2, this is where they are learning all of the likes, the dislikes, the hopes, the dreams, the fears, the worries of a victim of sex trafficking or a potential victim when they are spotting them. They're asking them, you know, what was your life like? What was your home like? What's the hardest thing that's ever happened to you? But it's kind of twisted in a way because they're wanting to use those things to then go ahead and later use down the road to throw it in a victim's faces. Don't you remember that, you know, so-and-so did that and they did this, and so you can't go back to them. And so it's that kind of behavior. But also, in a sinister way, in their creating trust, when they're getting to know their hopes and their dreams, they're going to one day use that and turn around to get what they want. And so say there is a young girl who maybe she is in a foster home because she's had a previous history of sexual abuse in her family. Maybe she says she just wants to be loved like normally, like she's never known real normal love. Well, a trafficker is going to see that and realize that her wish and her dream, her hope is to have a real family, to have a normal life, to have real love. And then he's going to give that to her. He's going to help her experience real love with the intention of one day he's going to turn around and manipulate that and use it to his advantage and what he wants. Stage 3 is filling the need. And so victims are showered with expensive gifts, affection, intimacy. They're made to feel really, really special and valued and quote unquote loved, right? This is where they're slowly being pressured or gaslit into the introduction of drugs and alcohol in the relationship. Sometimes it is like a peer pressure thing, but sometimes teens or young adults are already interested in it, so they just encourage that behavior and they supply drugs. And at this point, typically, it's always free. They're always going to give you free drugs and abundance of alcohol. And maybe they'll take you to parties. It'll be fun. It'll be a good environment. It'll feel good. And this is obviously where traffickers are lavishing attention on young victims. They're making them feel so special. Like no one has ever loved them the way that they're being loved right now. No one has ever cared about them, cared to ask these questions, cared to get to know them like this. And they think to themselves, this must be what real love is. This must be, my dream guy, because he just wants to know all about me. He says that he's going to love me. He says that he's going to protect me. He says, whatever I need, he's going to get it for me. And so now understanding it in stage 3 of filling the need, you can look at emotional or physical, practical aspects of filling needs, right? Traffickers, like if you can't afford food, if you can't afford housing, if you can't afford financial things, the trafficker is going to go and he's going to make sure that you have access to these things. He's going to make sure that you have what you need. And if it's an emotional need, right, if you feel neglected, if you feel like nobody cares, that nobody sees you, the trafficker is going to make sure that you feel like he sees you and that he loves you. Really knowing that one day he's going to use that to his advantage to introduce a victim into trafficking. Stage 4 is isolating the victim. And so guys, this stage is crucial in getting a girl to enter into sex trafficking, because at this point, anybody who is healthy in this woman's life is going to be removed. They're going to be out of the picture. They're going to be just taken out in a way that the victim feels like they cannot go back. They cannot go back to these people. They cannot talk to them. They cannot trust them. They cannot rely on them. So victims are trained that they cannot trust family and friends. And so this may start as almost like sweet, Because a victim may feel like their quote unquote, like their boyfriend or their lover or, you know, their friend is overprotective, they're caring, they're jealous, maybe a little possessive, but it's all with this thought, the victim feels like, man, they just really care about me. And remember back in that stage when they were learning their likes, their interests, well, they're asking questions like, what's the hardest thing that's ever happened to you? And beef with family members. And now this is where they're going to bring that up and say, well, remember when they did this and they did that, so you don't want to hang out with them anymore. Or I don't think that they're good for you. Or no one understands you like I do. And then, I'm sorry, babe, I'm sorry, I just can't help it, I just get jealous. And so slowly they are isolating this victim from anybody who is healthy in their life, who will speak truth in their life, because they want to get them off by themselves. And so if a victim feels like she has no support system, or no one will believe her, no one will understand her, then she's going to feel trapped and forced to stay in a life in the life instead of trying to escape. And I think it's worth noting that isolated people are easier to manipulate. They are easier to manipulate because they have no one speaking truth into their lives. They have no one who's speaking, hey, this isn't right. You're worth more than this, right? They're going to rely on their trafficker to tell them who they are and what they deserve. And eventually this is exactly what the trafficker is going to do. He's going to tell them, this is what you are, this is what you should do, this is how you should behave, and this is all you ever will be. There's actually a Bible verse that talks about this. It says, plans fail for lack of wise counsel. And when you have people who are speaking truth into your life, especially older people, they are able to just remind you of what your worth is, and that you don't deserve some lousy guy who's doing X, Y, and Z. And so for that particular reason, that's exactly why traffickers want to take you away from anybody who will be able to do that, who will ruin their plans. And so, traffickers just do not want family or friends to speak truth into a victim's life about red flags in their relationship. And if they do bring up red flags, then they are going to immediately turn around, well, they just don't understand us. They just want to break, take me away from you, etc. Stage 5 is when abuse begins. And so traffickers will demand for gifts that they have bought to be paid back, or will manipulate victims into doing quote unquote favors for them due to an emergency situation. It's typically financial. And so this can split two ways. So typically, this is how it plays out. It's either one, a trafficker comes and he's just very blunt with it. He's just very forward. You remember those gifts? Remember when I took you out to do your nails? Remember when I took you out to do your hair? Remember all the drugs that I gave you, all the alcohol I gave you, all the new clothes I bought you? Well, it's not actually free. It's not free. Remember when you're staying in my house because you said you need a place to stay? Like, did you really think that I was going to give that to you for free? Did you really think like all that was for nothing? No, you're going to pay me back. You're going to work to make up the money to pay me back. And when a victim typically says, well, I can't afford that, and he says, this is what you're going to do. And that's when a human trafficking plan is laid out. Or it'll go down another route. And this is what it's talking about, of emergency situations, typically financial. And so it can look like this, quote unquote, a boyfriend, a trafficker, who's wanting to pimp out a victim will tell them, like, babe, I love you so much, but I'm gonna have to leave. I'm gonna have to get out of town. I didn't want to leave you, but I have to go. And when a victim's like, why do you have to go? Don't leave me. He says, well, I just can't afford to live here anymore. I don't know what I'm gonna do, and remember, or something like, that dream that you had, that we were gonna have this life together, we were gonna get a big house together, and I was gonna make it big in the city. Well, we just can't afford it right now. Unless, well, I could never ask you to do that. But, well, it's just this one time, like, if you could do this favor for my friend, or this is just a short plan, it'll only be for a little while. I have this plan, we'll make lots of money, we'll make lots of cash, and then we can start our lives together, and then we can live together, we can have that big family like you were wanting. And then, obviously, a human trafficking plan is laid out of what they would be asking them to do. And so... And also, I know I have gotten this comment once before while having a conversation with somebody, and they're like, how do they, like, if the guy pretends to be their boyfriend and they really truly do believe it, how do they feel like they're not cheating? Like, you're cheating on your boyfriend. And I'll explain it to you because it's a whole psychological manipulation that's going on. And so what's come in response to that is, well, babe, like, it's not cheating. You know that I love you and that you only really love me. It's just sex. It's just sex. And they're separating sex from love. It's just sex. Because I know when you have sex with me, you love me. But when you have sex with these people, it's just so that we can be together, right? So we can have our dreams together. And that's the way that it's typically gone about. So stage 6 is complete bondage. And so this is, guys, where mixed signals are given. The victim is abused, then shown love and kindness, then abused again. And this is leading to feelings of guilt that they deserved the abuse. And then the victim is caught in an endless cycle, right? And so, guys, the whole goal in the psychological and physical process is for the victim to become attached to the predator and easily manipulated. And so I feel like it's also good to mention that they are being psychologically groomed, like mentally, psychologically, their brain is being rewired to associate sex and money together, right? That they're intertwined. And so this may look like the trafficker who's pretending to be a boyfriend has sex with the victim, and then he takes her to get her nails done, right? Or he has sex with the victim, and then he gets her a new outfit, or he takes her to get her hair done. And he might say things like, you are so amazing, you did so great, you were so wonderful. And eventually what happens is slowly it gets to the point where a trafficker will have sex with the victim, and he'll just give her money, and he'll say, go get yourself something nice, right? And so they don't even realize it at the time, but this is a conditioning process. They're slowly preparing them not only to associate sex with money, but they're preparing them to enter into the sex trade. And so this whole cycle is it's toxic, it's horrible, but it truly leaves the victim feeling like, A, they chose to be there. That is genuinely their choice to be there. Or B, that it's their fault that this is happening to them. Because remember, there's no one to speak truth into their life. And the trafficker, when things don't go their way, they're obviously going to say, this is all your fault. You chose to be here. You chose to do this. If you would just behave, if you would just do this, if you just do that, then this wouldn't have happened. And so they really do feel like the trafficker can change, can be different. They know, like in stage 2 where they're creating trust, they know how wonderful they can be. And then they feel like it's their fault that the guy is not acting that way. And so it's just very twisted. And I wanted to touch on something else before I end the podcast today. It was one of the biggest things that I really wanted to address today is, why don't they leave? Why don't they leave? And this is actually taken from a TED Talk called Domestic Sex Trafficking by Carly Church. She actually herself was a sex trafficking survivor and now is an advocate for anti-trafficking organizations. And I feel like it's so important that people understand this, because it's so vital in helping women and children get out of the sex trade, is understanding why they don't leave in the first place. And so understanding that, one, obviously, we talked about it, most sex trafficking, especially here in the Tri-Cities, is not where they are being physically forced anywhere. They're not being transported anywhere. It's not like they have bars on their door. This is a mental chokehold that has, or sometimes it is physical, right? There's force, there's coercion, there's manipulation or blackmail there. But for the most part, they can walk out the door anytime they choose, but they feel like they're trapped and they feel stuck. And so one of them, obviously, guys, that we were touching on is they have no community support. They feel like they have no support, right? Because they've been isolated from their friends and family. Okay, so the first is the fear of the traffickers themselves, right? Just because seduction is typically used more often than physical violence, that doesn't mean that the fear and the threat of physical violence isn't there, right? And so victims can feel afraid of their traffickers. Like, what are they going to do? What if they find me? What if they don't let me go? And I remember watching a documentary on trafficking, and one of the traffickers told the victims, because she said, I want to leave. I want to get out of here. And he said, oh, you want to go? Okay, go then. And so she's scared, but she starts to make her way to the door. He grabs her ankle, throws her to the floor, takes out a box cutter, and slices her foot open. And he says, the next time that you want to leave, you won't have feet. That can be just one example of the fear of the traffickers themselves, and the physical, what they can do to them. They've also been ingrained and instilled that the police will not help them, right? They've been called a prostitute. You're just a prostitute. They're going to arrest you and put you in jail. Nothing will ever happen to me, you know? The second is the fear of the unknown, right? And so a victim may feel like, even though this is a horrific situation, even though they hate it and they want to get out and they don't know what else to do, they feel, well, you know what? This may be the lesser evil than what they were previously experiencing. Especially when we're talking about cases of runaway youth, foster families, and all of the entanglements that come with that. They may feel like, where am I going to go? If I leave, where am I going to go? Especially if they're not a minor anymore and they have no form of education, no form of income, except for what they have been doing. They can have the practicality of like, what am I going to do, right? Where am I going to eat? How am I going to afford to eat? I don't have a job. I don't have a place to live. I'm not in contact with any of my family. I'm isolated, right? Where am I going to sleep? Lots of these victims have also at this point, because drugs and alcohol are typically introduced into the relationship, have addiction. So they're like, where am I going to get my next fix, right? And so there's a lot of factors that are going on in this fear of the unknown, of what is going to happen if I leave. Is it better that I stay than all the bad potential things that could happen if I go, right? Not that compiled on top of, what if a trafficker finds me and what will they do? Right? And the third is the trauma bond. And I would love to make an episode on this, guys, just so you guys could hear psychologically about what goes on in the trauma bond and how the victims can get caught up in this endless cycle because of that and stay. But this is, guys, talking about the psychological hold that traffickers have on their victims. And so in Carly's TED Talk, she talked about how when she was talking to her trafficker in the very, very beginning, she had a very hard home life, and she's talked about how all she wanted, her one thing in all of her life, she just wanted for someone to say that they were proud of her for anything. They just want to say that they were proud of her, because she had never heard that. Or maybe for another victim, it might be that somebody loved her, that maybe they've never truly heard that in their childhood because of their experiences, that nobody genuinely said, like, I love you, and they never felt loved or important or special, and the list goes on. And so Carly talked about how when she turned her first trick, which means that she had sex with somebody for like a commercial sex act, her trafficker came into her bedroom and sat on the bed, and he looked at her with this most genuine, kind look, and he said, Carly, I am so proud of you. And in that moment, she talked about how that was all she had wanted to hear, and the trafficker used that and manipulated her, and used that against her from what he had learned previously. But in that moment, she felt that he was genuinely proud of her, that she felt that he felt that. And she talked about how no matter what it was, no matter how bad it was, she just wanted to hear that again, and she would do whatever it took to hear those words again. And we see that with a lot of trafficking victims, where if a trafficker comes in and they genuinely say, you know, Trisha, Patty, Clary, I love you, right? They just want to keep hearing that. They want to grasp onto that, and they don't want to let that go. And so those are 3 reasons why mentally, psychologically, fear can kind of have a hold on victims and why they don't leave. And so, guys, this is just the basics of the stages of how traffickers get women and children, how they get a girl, right? And turn a normal, regular individual into a sex traffic victim. So if you would like to learn more about this or resources on how you can get involved to help stop sex trafficking, make sure that you check out other episodes, because I know we go more in depth about that. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at The Freedom Project TC for Tri-Cities. Again, that is The Freedom Project TC on Instagram. And be sure to go ahead and hit the follow and notification button so that you don't miss any new episodes when we upload. Thank you. Have a great day and be the change.